Um, my name is Tim Armstrong. I work for Rapid7. Just to give you a little bit of an overview, this isn't going to be super in-depth. I'm not going to look at any code or anything like that. It's really more of Android's malware timeline since 2010 into what we're seeing now. I don't do research for Rapid7. I used to do research for Kaspersky. Used to work for the Russians. And did a lot of PR stuff for them, but did a lot of Android reverse engineering and research on that as well. So it stayed on as sort of a hobby of mine. So anyway, that said, the interesting thing I think about Android at this point is that the way malware is developing on Android is very similar to the way malware has developed on Windows, but on a much shorter timeline. With the exception of that first period of just having destructive malware. Android's pretty much, the malware for the Android platform has pretty much always been designed around making money, almost. So I'm just going to go through some different things around the different types of malware we've seen, what they are, and then what we're seeing most recently. So I actually started in research like 2009 or something like that, and had no background in it. And the guys I was working with, they're like, you have to pick the platform. You have to pick something that you're gonna, know things about. I was like, well, I'm gonna pick Android. They're like, well, that's stupid. There's no malware for Android. And I was like, what? There will be. That's dumb. And if you looked on forums at the time, people were asking, should I get antivirus for my phone? And Sophos has this, and Kaspersky has this, and people were like, you're an idiot. There's no point. When suddenly, one of my colleagues discovered Fake Player. So what this was a movie player application, or a supposed movie player application. You could only really get it on Russian, I think it was on either Yandex or the Russian Google, and you had to search with a phone to actually get infected by it. And what it was just a little media player app. It actually didn't do anything, it was just an icon. And you'd click on it and it opened and then it closed, but in the background of it started a service. And the service, like most of the mobile malware that's out there, would just start sending SMS messages out to premium rate numbers, $5-6 per message, and then do it on a regular basis. Not complex. One of the funny things about this is it actually had the Hello World code from Google's Android coding tutorial still in the application. So it's pretty low level stuff, definitely somebody who was probably like a Symbian malware writer who said, well, I can figure this out. And then there was a second iteration of it called Porno Player, almost the same application except for the icon, which I've conveniently blurred out, was aimed at a different audience maybe, and it was a little more aggressive, but it's essentially the same program, just calling a different number. So then, a bunch of different other malware came out, and all kind of the same thing. It was all in outside of the Android market, primarily Russian markets, Chinese markets. I'm not sure if it's the case to this day, but for a long, long time, there was no Android market in China. So there's a lot of alternative markets. And in those alternative markets, there's really no, not that the Android Play Store has a lot of oversight, but there's just none. You can upload anything. And there's no barrier of entry or anything like that, and you can be very anonymous with writing apps, submitting them, and having people download them. So that was sort of at this time, that was sort of the only place you'd see malware when all of a sudden Droid Dream came out. The thing that's interesting about Droid Dream, there's a few things. Well, one of the main things is that it was pretty well orchestrated. This is the first time we really saw, multiple people probably involved, some real thought process behind the infection vector. There are 3 separate accounts on the Android store. This is before it was called Play. There's 24 separate applications. What they did is they took all the top popular applications at that time and made an application that either the same name or a very similar name, and sometimes even stole the icon for that game or that application. The one I found was called Super Guitar Solo. And they infected over 100,000 people through the legitimate Android market at that point. The other cool thing about that was that there were 2 root exploits in this. There's, I think it's called Exploit, Exploit and Rage Against the Cage were the 2 ones. Almost the same escalation of privilege root exploit. But yeah, you launch the app, it would run the exploits. The Rage Against the Cage one was, it just would fork the ADB process over and over and over and over and over again. Then it would crash, then it would restart as root, which was the vulnerability, or one of the vulnerabilities. And once it restarted as root, then you could install all sorts of crazy things. So that was cool. And the other thing that's interesting about that is that almost every phone on the market at that point had an update available to patch this vulnerability. So of the 100,000 people that got infected, probably like 90% of those people, had they been running AV or had they updated their phone, never would have gotten infected in the first place. The other thing about this is it did some cool things. It stole the IMEI and the IMSI numbers, which are the unique identifiers for your phone, one being the SIM card, one being the phone identifier itself. And it could download and install applications on its own without notifying you, because it had root privilege at that point. So it was pretty cool. One of the big things about it was that Google, for the first time, executed their ability to remove apps remotely from people's devices. This was a huge thing. This had never happened before, to my knowledge. And what they did was they actually launched a removal process. It ran native C code on your device, which was sketchy. And they didn't ask anybody. You just got an email notification that, hey, we did stuff on your device. So it was a big, it was a big to do in the industry. I think the only other real version of this type of thing happening that I've seen was when Amazon removed Brave New World from the Kindle devices, ironically. The other cool thing about this is that these malware writers, these guys aren't stupid. They immediately came out with their own Droid Dream remover application that was malware. So, not dumb. So the thing with mimicking what Windows has been doing here kind of keeps going. After Droid Dream, there was, here and there you'd find malware in the Android market, other places, almost always premium rate SMS stuff. The reason that this works is that in Russia, China, lots of Eastern Europe, when you go to get a premium rate number, you can do it pretty much anonymously. You can get it probably today or tomorrow. When people actually hit the number and do the premium rate message, you get paid almost instantly, or very quickly, if nothing else. And it's not run by the carriers. It's not like there's a Verizon or an AT&T that's overseeing this. They're independent companies. So for a company like I worked for Kaspersky, like for a company like that, they would then go to these independent companies and say, these numbers are being used for malicious purposes. This company's getting a cut out of this malicious purpose. So it really doesn't behoove them to go and, we'll get it shut down today. It'd be 20, 30 days and they'd eventually shut it down. So they were taking a cut too. This doesn't work in the US though, because there are independent companies that do this, but the billing process by and large is run by the carriers and they have a 30-day payment window. So you do this and you can't do it anonymously, but you can set up a premium rate number, but it's probably going to go through one of the carriers, the payment process is, and they're not going to pay you for 30 days. You're going to get caught. So that's really why it doesn't happen so much in the US yet. That said, there has been some instances of international premium rate carriers that are able to bill US customers, and some of these malwares will use that. So what about botnets? The first real instance we saw was this thing called Ganemy, or however you want to pronounce it. It's a lot of vowels. So this was the real first instance that we saw of this type of malware, and it was pretty cool. I mean, this is well-engineered stuff. This is when we're starting to get away from that, hello world code within the application. It could read and send SMS messages. It could delete messages. It could collect your messages. It could make phone calls. It could download files. Probably the coolest thing is that it could take commands from a remote CNC server, which is, to our knowledge, and as far as I know at this point, unique at that point in time. It can take all your contact information, send it up to a remote server, and this is the actual command list off of that. This is from a company called Lookout. It does some pretty awesome research on AV for mobile devices. So really, you see the things on here. skip time, change frequency. If you've ever done any work with botnets or anything like that, botnet clients typically have all sorts of calls like this that you can make to them.
What's toast : /
Which one?
Toast?
I don't know.
Oh.
I believe it's to do with toast notifications. On Android, when you get those pop-ups on the top of the screen, that's a toast notification. So I'm pretty sure they were able to push a toast notification. I don't know why you would do it though, because I mean, kind of the point is not to let the user know that you're there. But I think it shows the extent of capabilities they had though. So then, we're hot and heavy into antivirus at that point. People are actually seeing need for it. People are actually getting infected. And I was like talking to magazines and stuff about it at that point on a pretty regular basis. And then this thing called Carrier IQ broke. So if you haven't heard of it, Carrier IQ is essentially, they're a company. They're a legitimate company that sells this capability to different mobile makers to track the user's usage. And it basically is a rootkit on the phone. You can't remove it. You'd have to root your phone to get rid of it. So this was on a ton of HTC phones and some other company phones too, but HTC was the greatest defender. And it would collect all sorts of data about you, where you were, what you were doing, the SMS messages you were sending. And there was a lot of disagreement in the industry between researchers about what level you could see, but there was definitely consensus that you could see way too much. They were collecting way too much data on people. So then some researchers figured out that there were vulnerabilities in the communication methodology. And this quote on the bottom is actually from the FCC. And basically what this means is that if I, as a malware writer, got you to install an application, I could then port into everything that Carrier IQ was sending back to their communication center and collect it myself. So, pretty much total usage of the phone, GPS location, text messaging, all that stuff. And it was just impossible to remove without, rooting the phone. Some other cool examples of different things that, when we saw the maturing of this, GG Tracker. I'm sure pretty much everybody in here has had either themselves or a family member click on something and get fake antivirus to pop up. It's not quite the same thing, but it's very similar. It's the first real successful campaign I've seen where you're distributing malware through social engineering. So what this was is it was actually an advertisement that would pop. You'd hit a specific website, the advertisement would pop, and it looked like this. And at the time, that's exactly what the Android market looked like. But as you can see from the URL, you're definitely not on the Android market. That and the other thing, the idea of installing an application that makes your battery work better is kind of counterintuitive. But these guys infected a ton of people. And the way this actually worked was it would cover the whole screen with the advertisement. You'd think, oh, well, this is the Android market, I should install it. Hey, it's free. And it would then do a bunch of collection stuff like your location, like the IMEI and the IMSI number. It could download and prompt you to install a new application. I don't think it ever did, but it had the capability there. A lot of this stuff, the early stuff, really looks like test versions of, are we going to be able to pull this off in the future? So this one was cool. It was pretty unique, and I think this was discovered by Lookout as well. And then the big sea change happened. So Zipmo, I don't know, how many of you guys are familiar with Zeus? Yeah, like tons of you, okay. So the way that Zeus works is it injects code or does key logging or something like that, right? So what happened was European banks figured out, well, what if we do sort of a poor man's two-factor? We'll send a code as a text message to these people's phones that they have to put in on the website. Now we've got two-factor authentication, and even if their computer's infected, and even if there's keylogging going on, they're still probably not going to be able to get the whole process up to the CNC. So, and what that number is called that gets sent to the phone is called an MTAN. It's a mobile transaction authentication number. So what the guys that were coding Zeus figured out is, well, why don't we just infect the phones too? So what happened was they actually would ask you to install an application, and they did it under the guise of being trustier. And if you're not familiar with Trustier Report, Trustier they're a Boston-based company, well, they're actually an Israeli-based company that has an office in Boston. And they do a lot of work with top-tier banks. I know they do, at least the top 10 of the top 20 banks use Trustier. And it's basically just a malware detection or APT detection service, and they do a really good job. So they're both trading on Trustier's name at this point for some social engineering, but they're telling you, for added security, install this application. What this application did was it would actually steal the MTN number that was getting sent to your phone. So now they had compromised both sides of that two-factor authentication. It's pretty ingenious. And their coding methodology was good. Like, here's the ING website they were targeting. They're using quality logos to get this done. So pretty cool stuff. So that so far was the cooler things that were happening within malware. And you can see those all are Windows campaigns just ported to Android. And they almost follow the same discovery methodology where you start with basic stuff to steal money, and you get more complex, you bring in some social engineering, and then finally you're doing botnets. So then Google says, well, we're going to fix this. And anybody that has an iPhone who's followed like Charlie Miller or Dino Dizovi, mostly Charlie Miller, that Apple's got a sandbox. When you write an app for iPhone or for iOS in general, it goes through this whole review process. It's as far as I know, it's entirely automated unless something really flags and you need somebody to look at it. It's very closed and there's not a lot of information around it. But they do a review of all the applications. Up until this point, everything on Android had been the Wild West. It's like buyer beware, we're an open platform, good luck. So finally they couldn't really deal with this anymore. They had to sort of stem the tide of malware showing up in the Android market. It must have been affecting their branding or something like that. So they released this thing called Bouncer. So a Bouncer is an execution sandbox for Android apps. If you've done any development for Android and sold it on the marketplace, you'll know you basically create an account, you put in your credit card, they charge you $25, and you're a developer now. And up until this point, you could write an app, put it up for sale, and it was on sale right there. People could get it, in minutes. Bouncer comes out, and it's going to slow down the process. It's going to do, sandbox execution. That's going to stop malware and look at this stuff. The problem is that it's way underbuilt. So the guys at Trustwave are pretty smart, and they basically write an app that is a test of Bouncer and submit it to the market. And through doing this, they figure out that there is a timeout period. So the sandboxes that Bouncer is using, and this may not still be the case, there hasn't been a lot of follow-up research. I don't want to get banned from the marketplace, so I haven't really submitted anything. But they figured out if you just waited 5 minutes to launch your malicious code, you were fine. There's so many incoming applications. The thing just tests for 5 minutes, looks for network activity, looks for malicious libraries, SMS calls, things like that, and yep, this is good, and sends it along. The other cool thing here is each phone has one account, one contact, and 2 photos, and that's the whole sandbox. So not the smartest thing either. And then the other thing was that to accurately test these things against things like botnets and CNCs and all that stuff, the apps have to have internet access. So what these guys at Trustwave were able to figure out that if we do a callback, we can find out all the IP addresses Google is using in their sandbox. And they did this. And so technically speaking, and I'm absolutely recommending you don't do this, you could, a Russian hacker could DDoS the sandbox process or something like that. So it's a good attempt, but it's definitely not, done. So it's pretty interesting stuff. So that's, so far everything was built around making money in one way or another, whether it was Russian gangs working collectively or individuals, individual actors. It was all aimed at that kind of process. And then in a very, Windows malware fashion, we see just last week, Truly.a. So this is the first publicly reported, it's probably already happened, but this is the first publicly reported targeted attack using Android. And it's pretty crazy. This was also discovered by Kaspersky, by a colleague of mine, really sharp guy named Kurt Baumgartner. He does APT research specific around targeted attacks on activist groups and things like that, and he was one of the discoverers of this. So what this is there's a conference that started happening now between, what is it? I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. It's Uyghur or Uyghur. Uyghur. The Uyghur groups and just Chinese activists in general. They have this conference now. So what, whoever is attacking them, it looks to have Chinese attribution. I don't know. Don't kill me. But what it was is they basically compromised one of the accounts for the activists and then used that account to spearfish all his contacts with this campaign. And if you notice on the bottom, there's an APK file. That's the installer file for Android. So when you install that, it takes you to a link, or it takes you to this handy conference application. And the conference application is it's really just a list of things that are going to happen that day at the conference. But what it did is it's able to collect all kinds of details, SMS messages. It's a really pretty clever piece of malware. It does GeoIP. So I sort of liken it to the Aurora attack on Google in 2009, 8, something like that. It's just a more modern approach to the same old attack where you have a group of people that want to know what this breakout activist group is doing, and they just have a new attack vector. So I mean, so to sort of wrap up, it's sort of amazing how much it parallels the Windows malware, growth cycle or timeline or whatever you want to call it. It's really just repurposing a lot of old things. Android's definitely still not secure. 4.0's got a bunch of cool stuff in it, but it's not like we're entirely secure because of a lot of reasons, because of the marketplace, because of the nature of open source in some ways. But that's actually all I have. Did you guys have any questions on anything?
How do you feel about the permissions-based model? Do you think it can be secured?
No. I mean, well, that's the thing. So all the Android SMS malware, that like premium rate stuff, it asks you when you install it. Services that cost you money, and people just next right past it. So it's a problem it's like telling people not to click on links in their email. It's never going to get fixed. So I think you had one in the back.
Yeah, I was wondering, what are they using for like the CNC?
What are they, as the back end, you mean?
Yeah, because like, that's one thing that like I've seen them talk about with like mobile malware and like botnets. You got to take into account it's a mobile device, so it's going to be, you don't want to do anything that's network intensive because people pay for the data transfer.
Yep.
As well as the battery life comes into account. So it can't really keep too much constant communication. So what are they doing, like push notifications for CNC or?
So this like the targeted attack one, for example, they wait for an SMS message to come in and then send one out.
Okay, so that's how they're
Yep.
using SMS for.
Yep. It's sort of it's waits for triggers. Some of them are time based, so they'll do like 2 SMS messages per hour. So they're not just flooding you. I think the U.S. is different from a payment model than a lot of the rest of the world. They're just more connected. It's less, it costs less. The interesting thing about the Chuli malware, the targeted attack malware, is that they were actually able to locate the back end, and it's just server 2008 with Chinese language turned on. So, and it's hosting a web page, and if you go to that web page, it just says title in Chinese, and then a bunch of random Chinese characters. But as you visit the page, if you hit it with a mobile device, it'll actually download that APK and try to install it. Cool. Did you have a question?
Asking afterwards.
So, yes, sir.
Comments on the current status of anti-malware, antivirus for the Android platform? Vendor, non-vendor specific, just general comments about the quality of it?
It's, to my knowledge, so here's the problem. You have, like I've got, I think I've got a Core i5 in this thing. If I want to do emulation and behavioral analysis and all sorts of things, sandboxing on this device, it's not going to be very painful. You definitely can't do that on mobile platforms yet. So, to my knowledge, all the different antivirus companies are using a signature-based detection. If somebody really rolls out any kind of quality polymorphic engine, you'd never be able to catch it all. The better thing is to, I think, look for signatures on exploits and try to do that, but it's still, you know, you have to wait for the computing power of the platform to catch up before you can do any kind of quality analysis, I think.
So do you recommend to your mother to get an antivirus for
Yep.
her Android phone?
Yeah, but only the free ones, you know, which I definitely wouldn't have said in a past life, but yeah, I mean, especially in the US, it just doesn't happen, you know. Actually getting an infected phone in the US is pretty tough. If you lived in Amsterdam or Russia, definitely, yep, you need it. But within our, you know, within our little cell, I don't think it's that important. Yep.
What would be some indicators if we do see a mass infection of phones within the U.S. or mobile devices?
What would be an indicator? I don't know. It's hard to see.
I mean, I guess my question is more, besides money, is there any other motivation that we would see?
Well, so there's a different question there, actually. The problem with the U.S. Market isn't malware, it's advertising. When you install an application, I mean, don't forget, Google's an advertising company. They do some incredible things. I don't want to, you know, badmouth Google, but they are an advertising company at their core. When you install an application from the Play Market that has advertising injected into it or has modules within the application, those modules get the same permission on your phone that the application itself does. So the biggest problem right now is that is data leakage. You know, if I allow some game from the Android market to look at my contact list, it allows the application or the advertising instance to also collect my contact list. And I bet, you know, I'm sure friends of mine have gotten, you know, targeted email campaigns around that stuff. I don't think you're going to see any, until everybody's using Google Wallet or some sort of payment method like that, I don't think you're going to see any mass infections, you know, on the scale of Windows. I think advertising is providing enough money to everybody right now that there isn't any real motivation for it yet. So. Anyway else? Well, if you want to come up after, that's cool. So, but thank you very much.
Thank you.